Hello everyone and welcome to Create Connects. Today we're going to talk about the Service Needs Strategic Fund, and this is in its first year of operation as a funding round, and we're going to talk with some of the successful applicants to that round. So before we do, can we acknowledge country? I am currently living and working on Bidjigal land, and I take the opportunity to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So as I was saying, we are talking today about the Service Needs Strategic Fund. Now, I will be joined by 6 of the successful applicants. Fraser Caulfield from ATYP, Vic McEwen from the CAD Factory, Carl Skiberis from Dance Makers Collective, Lena Nalus from Diversity Arts Australia, Gabrielle Mordy from Studio A, and Michael Campbell from Westwoods. Thanks for joining us all today. Before we meet our successful applicants and talk through their projects, I'll just to give you a sort of brief rundown on the Service Needs Strategic Fund and how it came about, and I guess some of the objectives that we were hoping to achieve and that we will demonstrate through talking to the successful applicants. So the Service Needs Strategic Fund was opened this year. It is a $300,000 per year pool of funding, and it is in place for the next, for this year and a subsequent 2 years. So the Service Needs Strategic Fund came out of a review of service need in New South Wales arts and culture areas. So basically the purpose of this fund is to address some of the gaps in service provision that were identified through that review. So the purpose of the Service Needs Strategic Fund is to meet demand for additional professional development and capacity building services across the arts and cultural sector as prioritised by the Service Needs Review. It's there to encourage innovative approaches to delivering these services with a view to promoting best practice models for future delivery of service. And it's there to evaluate the impact on service provision for these areas and on the arts and cultural sector each year. So really we're sort of, it's a very targeted program, and we're very keen to see identified areas of need and identified outcomes for addressing those needs. So we basically want to see that the programs that are supported are going to be effective and are going to make change in those areas where there are gaps for services for artists, for cultural and creative practitioners, and for organisations. So proposals were invited that design and deliver strategic support programs and activities to address the following priority areas of need identified by the Service Needs Review. So if we go to the next page, these needs were identified as digital resources. So looking at efficient ways of developing high quality web-based digital resource and services to meet business, practice and professional development needs. Practical facilitation, looking at programs that enhance capacity to assist artists and arts organisations to manage, produce and market their work. Careers development, so looking at strategic processes to developing partnerships that generate career development pathways for artists and for organisations. First Nations engagement, strategic programs that engage with First Nations artists, arts organisations and communities to build capacity and deliver services. New South Wales priority areas, programs that provide support for and engage with artists, arts organisations and communities from the New South Wales Government's priority areas, and that includes regional New South Wales, Western Sydney, artists with disability, First Nations, arts and cultural practice, disability and youth. We're also looking at spaces for art, so strategic programs and activities that assist artists and arts organisations to find affordable space to make and present their work. So the first person I'm going to invite to speak is Fraser Caulfield from Australian Theatre for Young People about the Youth Arts Sector National Connections Project. Please join us, Fraser.
Hi, Beck.
Thank you. And can you talk a bit about, I guess, from the perspective of the Service Needs Review, which did identify sort of those New South Wales priority areas that include youth, what you were sort of looking at in terms of the gaps that needed to be sort of filled through this program?
Yeah, so the youth arts sector in Australia, we've seen it shrinking, I suppose is the easiest way to put it, consistently over the last 20 years. In 2008, there were 21 federally supported youth arts companies around Australia. In 2015, there were 14 companies, 12 funded through the Australia Council's Youth Program Fund, 2 funded through key organisations, separate to those companies supported through the state government of New South Wales. In 2022, there will be just 3 of those companies left in terms of receiving federal government support. And so while Create has very much stepped into the breach in New South Wales in supporting youth arts work, we're still finding that across the country there's decreasing investment in youth arts activities. So we are looking at using the support of Create New South Wales to host a national conference next year, and the money from this will enable companies from around New South Wales to be able to attend a 3-day event at ATYP's new spaces at Walsh Bay to look at a range of measures and opportunities for us to kind of try and consolidate the youth arts sector.
Because I guess with that reduced amount of organisations that are funded, there's increasingly reduced opportunity for young practitioners to gain experience and training and skills and all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. That we're seeing there's less investment through arts support for youth arts activities. But at the same time, there's a growing body of evidence that young people participating in arts and performing arts activities led by professional artists has a whole bunch of positive community outcomes. So there's a whole bunch of evidence that's coming through that looks at the way participating in the arts improves well-being and mental health. It improves education outcomes across curriculum. It improves connection to community and other things. So what we're looking to address is the way the youth arts sector communicates broadly its benefits and its impact across all tiers of government and more broadly within the community.
So I'm just going to go to the next slide, which sort of covers, because you're talking about a 3-day conference, but actually it's a much broader kind of program than that. There's sort of 3 days of kind of intensive kind of engagement, but there's actually a lot more that's going on within the program.
Yeah, absolutely. So the funding from Create we're able to use in partnership with additional funding that we've received from the Ian Potter Foundation. So one of the things that we're looking at doing is we're going to increase regular communications across the youth arts sector. So one of the things we're going to do is establish a quarterly e-newsletter, just raising the profile of organisations that are delivering professionally led programs nationally. We have a digital classroom called On Demand, which is accessed by high schools and primary schools very heavily in New South Wales and Queensland actually, but accessed by schools across the country. So we have the capacity to communicate more clearly what is being generated within the youth arts sector across schools nationally through the On Demand platform. And then we also are looking at some research into, again, kind of clearly quantifying and communicating the impact of youth arts activities on young people.
And it's also, I guess, a major opportunity for ATYP to step up to a sort of leadership. I mean, you already do, but to sort of consolidate a leadership role around how to sort of address the sort of growing gaps for, I guess, the youth art sector in Australia as well as in New South Wales.
Yeah, so one of the things that ATYP has always done is it's regularly in contact with youth companies across the country around in a range of ways. Once we have a venue, we showcase performances by other companies each year. We're in conversation around new work that's been generated by companies and how that can be shared and partnered. So we're well placed to, and obviously working with young people is our core business. So we have a broad existing network. The Create funding will enable us to invest in really extending that proactively, identifying organisations that are delivering work with young people across the state, and bring them together to get to know one another and what else each other is producing and facilitate opportunities for partnerships and collaboration.
Brilliant. Thanks, Fraser. What we're going to do at the end of this, I guess, is have the opportunity for sort of questions from among our cohort on this call. But I might move on to our next presenter now. Thanks, Fraser. And invite Vic McEwen from CAD Factory in the beautiful Riverina region of New South Wales to talk about the project, the Contemporary Arts Socially Engaged Case Incubator.
Thanks very much, Beck. I'm calling in from Wiradjuri country today in the Western Riverina in Narrandera, just 100 kilometres west of Wagga Wagga. And our project, the Case Incubator, is an opportunity for us to provide some opportunities in terms of professional development for artists who are working in an area that we might call socially engaged arts practice. And so the CAD Factory is an organisation that works in a multidisciplinary way, often with diverse non-arts partners, whether they're health, the environment, various community parts of our communities, to develop work in engagement with those people and places. And so we developed this project, the Case Incubator, out of a previous project that we delivered called Becoming the Future. And what Becoming the Future did was to invite people that we might consider to be world leaders in areas of practice that were related to the work that the CAD Factory does. So we invited Clive Parkinson from the UK, who is considered to be a world leader in the area of arts and health. And he is the director of the Manchester Institute of Arts, Health and Social Change. We also invited out the director of the Global Institute of Sustainability in Arizona, Joni Adamson. And because we also have a music bent to what we do at the CAD Factory often, we invited Susan Rogers, who was Prince's sound engineer for 6 years, live-in sound engineer, and made the Purple Rain album and a number of other albums, and then went on to become a neurologist who understands how your brain is affected by sound and music. And so what we did was create an opportunity for artists around the state of New South Wales to apply to come and engage with these people in conversation for a weekend. That was really from time that we spent attending conferences and things where we noticed that at a lot of arts conferences, there seemed to be a lack of artists in the audiences. So often because we're invited to talk at these conferences, that we were exposed to some amazing thinking by people, and then thinking because of the financial barriers and travel barriers that often artists face, that those people weren't speaking to an audience of artists. So we wanted to try to reduce some of those barriers to allow artists the potential to sit in conversation to some of this leading thinking in areas that might be relevant to the work that they do. And so when we delivered that project, what we thought was that it would be about a knowledge exchange. But what we learned was that we were bringing together groups of artists. Each time there was 21 artists, over 60 artists came for those 3 periods of time with those 3 visiting people. And what we discovered was that we identified really serious issues that exist for artists that might be working in a socially engaged way. So, these include the fact that often socially engaged artists are working independent of institutions, so they're working on their own. So they don't have the opportunities to network, to discuss their practice, to discuss the concerns of their practice, their own health and welfare, for example, and just to kind of debrief and to talk through the type of work that they make and why they make it. And so, the CAD Factory has delivered a lot of projects over the years, and the real success of that project was the way that people spoke after the event about the impact that it had on their practice. And so when this opportunity to apply for this funding around strategically contributing something back to our sector, we thought it was an opportunity for us to say, well, we don't actually identify a group of artists that are socially engaged. So we might identify a dance community or a sound art community or a visual arts community, but we don't identify a socially engaged arts community, although there are many of us out there. And so this is an opportunity for us to provide mentorships to socially engaged arts practitioners, to create public programs that are both live in person and delivered digitally. So with those participants that we create mentorships for, to develop resources for the sector, so digital resources, discussion papers, maybe I'll use a word framework, I'm not sure yet, different sort of things that we can contribute back to the sector.
I think one of the things as well that struck me about this application was that sort of it addresses a couple of those areas of the service needs review in terms of sort of that practical facilitation element and the career development element, by also, I guess, engaging with organisations as well, and sort of presenting organisations that might need to sort of learn more about the practice of socially engaged art in order to consider it in programming. So actually sort of providing a number of opportunities for the kind of the pathway to be involved in the process that you're exploring.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, there's key partners involved in this project. There's 10 non-arts partners, 10 arts and non-arts partners involved in this project. And I think that relationship is two-way. And so some of those partners, for example, are health, working with the Sydney Local Health District, and in particular with the Sydney Facial Nerve Clinic, who are dealing with people with facial paralysis as a result of cancers or Bell's palsy or brain tumours. Working with cultural keeping institutions such as the National Museum of Australia, working with the local, in Wagga Wagga, 100 kilometres from here, supported studio, inviting those artists to come and speak with the people who are having mentorships with us about working across arts and disability. We're working with different Indigenous groups in our region and having those people coming and speaking to the mentorees again. So we're really trying to create a two-way conversation that both allows people with lived experience of the diversity of life to come and speak directly to people participating in this, rather than us speaking about it in an abstract way and from our perspective, but also opens up all of those partners to allow that thinking of the value of socially engaged arts practice to seep in to what they do. Because one of the sort of key drivers underneath the programming of the Cat Factory is that we argue very strongly for the role that the arts can play outside the arts sector. Whilst we focus on our arts practice, so it's not about seconding the arts practice, it's by focusing on that we can, you know, make some major contributions to these non-arts places.
Thanks for that, Vic.
I think,
carry on, please.
I was just going to say, sort of finally, as well as the mentorships and the development of resources, an important thing that we're going to try to achieve through this is discussions around the idea of care for artists that are involved in socially engaged practice. As we look to artists more for things such as creative recovery after the bushfires, and as more and more artists consider themselves to be practicing in a way that seems to be socially engaged, I think what we have identified is that there is a really strong need for us to have discussions about how do we care for those people that are caring for our communities through arts practice. And so that's, we're hoping to highlight that conversation through this program as well.
Yeah, and I note that you're bringing in sort of mental health awareness training and other things to sort of recognise that need for that supportive element to a practice that does, you know, intentionally go into the spaces outside of art and encounters a whole range of social and cultural situations to support.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's a real key component of what we're trying to contribute back to this growing part of our sector.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vic. And again, we'll probably talk at the end among ourselves about various aspects of your program. I might move now to Dance Makers Collective and invite Carl Skiberis to talk about Make It Happen. Hi, Carl.
Hi, Beck.
So, Carl, can you talk about the kinds of gaps in the area of practice that Dance Makers is engaged with? And I know that it kind of is beyond dance and moves into a whole range of other disciplines. Can you talk about the sort of gaps that you were seeing that you wanted to address through this work?
Yeah, sure. So I guess what's probably useful to start with is just to explain how we work as an organisation. So DMC is the only collective-led dance company in Australia, and we're quite proud of that way of working as an organisation. That we are ourselves. There are 9 people who are independent makers and choreographers that work across a range of different kinds of dance making, and that we co-create work together, but also co-design programs and work through the kind of strategic mapping of the organisation as well. So we think about ourselves not just as creative makers, but as a collective leadership model. And I guess our practice in that regard is very much about the role of the artist as self-producer and the networking that occurs within developing your own work. And we've been able to do that in this very unique model, but we're very aware of the way that artists independently outside of that are working, and in other disciplines as well, because our practice, obviously dance is a very interdisciplinary practice anyway. We're based in Western Sydney, and we work a lot with lots of different organisations and lots of different art form practices. We work with composers and we work with visual artists and a whole range of other people. So I guess our kind of thinking around developing this program, which we were piloting when the fund was announced, actually. So we were able to kind of do this practice and test this in real time and then expand on that, is trying to create an environment where a range of artists who are living and working in a particular area can come together and upskill in those areas of self-production that we don't necessarily get taught in training institutions. That is starting to change a little bit, but so much of that work of, how do I actually make my project happen in the real world comes from developing relationships with others and just giving it a go. And there's a kind of, growing need, I think, from our kind of, experience working with a range of people for the last 10 years, that's an area that's missing. So this program is a range of things. The way that it's been designed is that we've partnered with 9 different local government areas in Western Sydney, and each of those local government areas we've targeted specifically either an organisation who's connected to that local government or the cultural team in that area or an art centre that is a hub for the community that's there to host these 9-week courses, which cover a range of areas around how to make work happen, which is obviously where we've come up with this idea, make it happen. And that within that environment, we're not only providing those skills for people in doing that self-producing work, but also connecting them with people within their local communities. And in that process, having a kind of ongoing, growing network of independent practitioners across Western Sydney to begin with, that can not only work together, but also support one another. And in the pilot that we delivered, which we delivered in the first half of this year with Parramatta Art Studios with the support of the City of Parramatta, we did have an interesting kind of cross-section of artists who were, many of them dance, because obviously that's where our practice is, but we had a range of visual artists, and we had musicians and people working in writing as well, coming along to that at various stages in their careers. And over that 9-week period, I think that environment of people being able to get to know one another, to develop a value system and a way of working that isn't just downloading information and going away, but actually discussing in a confidential space what their practice is, how they go about developing those relationships, and working together and learning from each other is a really key part of how we have developed our work as an organisation. So that's the kind of, I guess the motivator for designing this particular program in this way.
Great, and it does really sort of fall into that kind of area of practical facilitation. Through the review, there was a lot of feedback about trying to sort of level up or get to the next step or make better networks and find opportunities that seem to have barriers against them. And so basically, this is a nice picture of you, I think, smiling in a, it's coming up. There we go. So that was taken during the pilot program?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And so what I see with this program is that you're sort of focusing on people or creative practitioners taking up the initiative, being entrepreneurial, and sort of collaborating together to sort of understand better how to get works to production phases and tours and whatever people might want to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's also really important about this funding is also what Vic was saying around being able to make those particular courses and skills financially accessible. So this funding enables all of those participants to do that work for free, and taking 2 hours out of your week is already quite a lot for an independent artist to do, but to also not have to pay for that coursework is really valuable. And I guess in the pilot phase, what we discovered with those 13 artists that participated in that first run was a lot of the work that people are struggling to do is around the kind of processes involved in that administrative work that we're constantly having to apply for funding and apply for a whole range of different AOIs and all these sorts of things. And that when you have an organisation behind you, quite often there is a bit of administrative support that enables you to run through a series of processes that make that easy. But for independent artists, those sorts of templates and those practical things, they're not there. So alongside the kind of skills and that workshop environment where we can talk through all of those things, we've also designed a range of very specific processes that people can take away, templates and things that they can use to, create budgets that tap into Australia Council, local government, and Create New South Wales funding applications, all those sorts of things that, when you're working in a freelance capacity, that those processes aren't there necessarily. So that's a big, a big part of what the program is delivering as well.
And when you are emerging as an artist, it's also quite confronting to and challenging to embark upon a major funding application without the confidence or the backing of a support network or an organisation, as you say, to guide you through those things.
Yeah. I guess the other thing that's also happening with this program, so we're delivering it 3 times a year with a different local government area in Western Sydney, and we're also doing an online version. And the intent for that online version, we will have it Auslan interpreted, and we will also deliver some content that is on demand. So we're trying to, provide this stuff in a way that's accessible to people who might also be in isolation, and trying to create those cohorts in particular around certain areas. So identifying a particular regional network that can come to a session with a small cohort of people. I think the other thing that's really important is that quite often this content is delivered in a way that's very broad, and that the relationship part isn't necessarily key, but we've certainly found in our practice and the people that we work with that so much of the learning is in the relationships and in being able to hear people talk about their experiences, that the things that they've stuffed up, or so much of those environments is key, I think. So yeah, trying to create the space for people to learn, to test, to try things, to design project plans, and know how to do a budget, know how to design the risk assessment, how are we going to prove this is going to work, and doing that in conversation with other people who might be doing similar things in a safe space, so people don't feel stupid or lost or confused, but they can actually go through and unpack those questions in small groups, which is really important in the way this has been designed. So we're capping it at 16 people so that we can really get to know one another and work through our projects in detail.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carl. And again, we'll come to you at the end of the individual presentations. Thanks for that. We'll move on now to Diversity Arts Australia and Lena Nalus. to talk about culture change, diversity, equity and inclusion capacity building program. Hi.
Hello.
How are you going? So, Lena, can we talk about the sort of area that you are trying to change in Diversity Arts Australia? It's quite a big proposal, I think, but very exciting.
So our program is called Culture Change, and it's a capacity building program that aims to support organisations in their diversity, equity and inclusion objectives. It's really focused on systems change, particularly working with arts companies and organisations, and kind of looking across all areas that organisations in the arts and creative sectors work in, and supporting them to reflect on those areas and develop a capacity to kind of be more inclusive of artists and communities from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. But we're also working intersectionally in this project. So we also have partnerships with deaf and disabled organisations, Accessible Arts New South Wales and individual trainers. So it's a one-year project working with 8 organisations across New South Wales. It has a strong focus on regional organisations as well. We're based in Western Sydney, which I believe has the highest kind of number of culturally diverse creatives in New South Wales, so inclusive of people who identify as migrants, refugees, people of colour or culturally and linguistically diverse. And so we're kind of addressing a lot of the priority areas that have been identified by the Service Needs Review of Create New South Wales, but they align so strongly with our priority areas as well. The other thing that's really exciting about the program is that it will be delivered entirely online. So we'll be able to develop a hybrid program that can support people as we move in and out of lockdown, and build in a lot of accessibility for people with different accessibility needs, and also develop kind of tools and resources that can live beyond the project and support other organisations.
That's great, and I think, you know, reflecting back on some of the material that we gathered through the review process, we were constantly getting these ideas that we want to include more diverse audiences, or we want to be able to program more diverse artists, but this sense that there was a sort of gap to actually being able to get there and do it. And I think this is what you're trying to address on a really fundamental level with your program.
Yeah, that's right. We are aware that a lot of organisations are saying to us, we want to make change, but we don't know how to make change. And so we've developed an organisational audit that looks like a self-reflection tool for organisations to use across all areas of work. So from programming and commissioning to recruitment and employment and, you know, company culture, for example. And so that's kind of stage 1 of the project, where organisations can reflect on the way that they work. And from that, we work with them to develop equity action plans over a substantial period of time, and then also to run specialist training in each of those areas. And we also embed mentors into the program, and it's kind of pretty exciting because it's also capacity building. We're doing capacity building at a whole range of levels. So the mentors and trainers are predominantly, except some of the specialists, are predominantly from arts backgrounds as well. And so we're training creatives to be trainers as well and to be mentors, and so building their capacity, culturally diverse and disabled or people with disability, however you choose to identify, artists and creatives to be those trainers and mentors, and or work alongside those trainers and mentors, so that it's really relevant to the arts, because the way in which exclusion happens in various art forms is very specific to those art forms. So it's a really comprehensive program, and it's kind of exciting. It's really focused on systems change, and that's not to say that individuals won't get a lot from it. They will, but we know that there's limitations to a lot of training that just focuses on individuals. We can be really good people, but it isn't necessarily going to bring about systems change. And giving people really practical templates, worksheets, case study examples, resources that can show them how other companies have done this or how they could potentially do this work, I think is what has been identified, by the sector as what they need.
Yeah, and I guess those 8 organisations that you engage with in this year then sort of almost become the case studies, hopefully for a continuing sort of idea of the program as well.
Yes, well, the 8 organisations we're hoping will become a bit of a cohort, a community of practice who encourage each other, so are connecting, and that's one of the beauties of online, is that we can connect in a way that we can't necessarily face to face. And there are obviously some not so positive things, but that's so it brings a kind of a cohort, a community of practice together to support each other, but also influence who they work with and influence other organisations and encourage other organisations on that journey of making change and becoming more inclusive. And we know that at the moment that it's a big issue, the underrepresentation of a lot of communities in the arts and creative sectors in New South Wales.
Definitely. And I did want to ask, in terms of the organisations that you're working with, are they organisations that have contacted you, or are you sort of looking across a range of areas of practice in this first cohort?
Well, for this first cohort, we've been chatting to regional organisations for a while and wanting to develop work and projects and partnerships. And so we connected with them, but we'll go through a process where we'll have a call out, an EOI process. Organisations will put in applications to participate in the program, and then we'll have representatives who are independent from Diversity Arts helping us to make those decisions, and we'll select 8 organisations. So we want to be we want to be transparent about the selection of the organisations, and we also want to know that we're not forcing any organisations to do it, that they're really genuinely committed. And one of the criteria for participation is that there is buy-in from the board and the leadership, and that there needs to be some attendance from the board and the leadership, because we don't want to, if we force organisations to do this work, then they're not going to kind of come into that space with the open heart that we need them to. Yeah.
Definitely. Thanks for that, Lena, and we'll come back to you at the end of the presentation. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Beck.
And so now we'll move on to Gabrielle Mordy, who's going to present on Rights Animated with Studio A. Hi, Gabrielle.
Hi, and thanks very much for having me. So Rights Animated addresses a need that's become very apparent at Studio A itself, and Rights Animated, I guess, is recognising a need that we've seen more broadly in the sector, which I think your report identified. So Studio A provides professional development to artists with intellectual disability. And for a long time, Studio A has been very focused on supporting our artists to make the artwork that they make. They're all the 17 artists we support are all very talented artists. But what's become apparent over the years that I've worked with a lot of the artists with intellectual disability is that there is a lack of understanding around, or that there's a real vulnerability to exploitation. So for many of the artists, they are selling artwork that's in the thousands of dollars, but they would accept $5 for an artwork. And also a lack of understanding around things like copyright. So there's a real vulnerability around having copyright protected. This project, the Rights Animated project, was inspired by a series of policies of Studio A company policies that one of our artists, Greg Sindel, illustrated. So I don't know if we can go to the third slide, which kind of brings what I'm talking about to life. So Studio A, our artists all are supported by the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and as Studio A is thereby supported via funding from the NDIS, we have a series of guidelines and policies that we need to be delivering as part of our service to our artists. And it's been important for us to have easy read policies, but we found that no matter how kind of simple, how in simple language we broke the policies down to, and the policies, those policies that I'm talking about really exist to protect the artists, so they're the artists' rights. We found that the artists weren't engaging with them. Many of our artists struggle with literacy, struggle with reading and writing. So no matter how easy read we made them, we just found that the artists, when we asked them what the NDIS, what our Studio A policies were about, they couldn't repeat it to us, didn't seem to be retaining it, didn't seem to be grasping it. And I've got to say, even though it is mandatory for all the staff to read the policies, I can't say that the staff were necessarily enthusiastic about reading them and, you know, enthusiastically going and getting our policies off the shelf. So one of our artists, Greg Sindel, is a graphic novelist, and we thought, well, why don't we commission and invite Greg to illustrate and turn our policies into a graphic novel. So we really gave Greg free license to imagine our policies how he wanted to, and he wanted to imagine Studio A as a medieval castle. So he created a key at the beginning of the document where he interpreted the staff and Studio A itself and the artist as he wanted to, and then he illustrated some of it's a multi-page document that you can see on our website, and it's up on the wall of Studio A, and it's something that all the artists and the staff have really embraced. Our chairman, Shane Simpson, is an arts lawyer and has a big community of legal practitioners that he's connected to, and he shared this policy document with his legal community, and we got the most incredible feedback from the legal community as well, saying it was the first policies of this kind, first illustrated policies that they'd encountered, and how engaging they found them. So one of the interesting outcomes that we found from this process of illustrating our own policies was that not only did it make the content more engaging or engaging at all for our artists who they were designed for, they also became engaging for our staff, and our staff became proud of our policies, and the legal community seemed to be praising what an artist could bring to the interpretation of policies. And we also had contact from the NDIS, who also said it was the first work of this kind that they'd encountered, and they would like to do a story on it. So I think this is a case where an artist with disability is really leading a movement of showing what art can bring to worlds outside the gallery world, worlds outside the art sector, and I think that's a really important demonstration. And so that inspired, if we go back now to the slides, what is the Artist Rights Project? So we thought, well, why don't we extend Greg Sindel's capacity to illustrate important information specifically for people with disability? Why don't we extend that beyond Studio A and look at how he can use his skills to be helpful more broadly? So I was a founding member of the Supported Studio Network. The Supported Studio Network is managed by Accessible Arts, the advocacy body in New South Wales for arts and disability, and it links supported studios, and supported studios provide professional development to artists with disability. So they're just like Studio A, and there's studios of this kind nationally. So we began a conversation with Accessible Arts about this need and about whether studios beyond Studio A, supported studios beyond Studio A, were experiencing this need, and they confirmed that they were. And we also had been in an ongoing conversation with Arts Law, and Arts Law, the national legal service for Arts Law. They also recognised that there was a real need to have more accessible information for artists with literacy challenges. So what we're doing with artist rights is we're working with Accessible Arts and we're working with Arts Law in order to create more accessible rights for artists with literacy challenges across New South Wales. What Arts Law will do is they will provide us the legal information that needs to be illustrated. Studio A will work with our artist Greg Sindel to support him to create this material, and then we'll work with Accessible Arts, who will organise a collective of 10 to 12 artists with intellectual disability who will review the material and give us critical feedback, ensuring that the material is serving its purpose and being accessible. And then we'll work with Arts Law and Accessible Arts to distribute the illustrations that are made.
It's such a fantastic project because it's so targeted. It's something that's really, that could end up being quite a dry sort of, exercise. But Greg's work, as you sort of evidenced with the policy documents and your policy areas, that it can instantly be sort of improved and be made very accessible through the work of an artist.
It might be dry, but it's actually so important. And I think sometimes, which we encountered with the let me call them the NDIS policies that govern Studio A, I even myself can get caught up in thinking, oh, the policies, yes, the policies. But actually, when you engage with them, the policies are so important, and they're about the core of what places like Studio A is about. And I just think what a deficit and what a terrible thing if they remain inaccessible to the people who they exist for.
Yeah, and as you described at the beginning, the opportunities for exploitation are just so enormous that it's a really important area for people. Artists in general are sort of open to so much exploitation, but this is an area where you can really be supportive of a range of practitioners that maybe get left out of the general messaging.
And also, our artists are vulnerable to exploitation, but also some of our artists are vulnerable to the reverse. Trying to explain copyright to one or two of our artists who I can see at times infringing on the copyright of other artists. I can see how important it is for their own protection and for the protection of other artists, for Studio A artists, for example, to understand what copyright is and why it's important.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Gabrielle, and we'll talk a little bit later. I'll just move on to now to our last presenter, who's Michael Campbell from Westwoods, to talk about Western Sydney Academy of Writers proposal. Hi, Michael.
Hello, Beck.
So again, with you, what was the sort of gap in service that you were seeing and wanting to kind of fill with this program?
Well, across all our programs, we have tried to design it's an awful way of describing it, but it's a pathway of opportunity that begins with young people, works with school-aged, primary, secondary, after school, and taking that all the way through emerging writers into their first major work, into their second major work, and then bringing professional writers back in to help facilitate the programs. And we do that through workshops, residencies, masterclasses, online reading, showcasing, developing audiences, a whole range of things. But through that process, we really did identify that there was a real gap to provide foundational support for the creation of sustainable career trajectories for emerging writers.
Mm.
And so what this the Academy does is it is really aimed to give emerging writers what they need to know to survive as independent artists. Now, so our aims with it, the project, is to give writers agency, independence, agency to survive in the world through the provision of the knowledge, skills, to create their own voice, to have confidence in their own voice, and to be able to bring their work into a broader community, because writing is a very solitary practice.
Mm.
It's very glacial. It goes in fits and starts, but it is a long haul writing. And so so it's about providing the very, very highly practical tools. And we're talking over a year long with seminars on a monthly basis, and 360 support around their writing and any opportunities that they want to seek through the writing. Starting with the very, very simplest, how to write an invoice. And honestly, that's where we're starting. It's how to write an invoice, how to do tax. What can, as an independent artist, you can claim for tax. It's also about how to build an online profile. It's how to get the attention of publishers. It's how to find the opportunities to be able to pitch your work, to write to a commission, to write to a brief, how to write your bio, how to provide your online profile. It's about connections into the industry. It's also about how to write a grant. Being on the other end of looking at grants and assessing grants, as I'm sure many of us do, across art forms, I think writers are very bad at writing grants. And so it's how to write in that specific style. It's also about how to present your work, how to read your work, how to create an event for your work. It's about how to find your community and build it as a sustainable community. That's the intention, and that's where the need is.
I think it's really interesting that this program the Dance Makers Collective program and the CAD Factory program and Diversity Arts Australia, we're sort of across all of those programs looking at this idea of sort of communities or cohorts of practice and bringing people together. And I think in the case of Westwoods, from that solitary perspective and bringing people together in a group that can actually be quite supportive of itself beyond the term of the engagement as well.
Well, one of the, in the design of the program, and I think this is very important, is that we do provide mentorship on the writing itself, because that is an adjunct to how they bring themselves out into the world and how they create their career. So we provide something on the craft, but I think one of the important thing is that we aren't in any way one of those organisations who try to have a certain ideology or a perspective or a particular type of writing. So it's writing across all the forms. So what we are providing is will be very tailored to the specific needs of the cohort, which will be around 14 to 20 emerging writers. Now, we're also, whilst we are Western Sydney focused, we're also talking about remote and regional as well. And we can do this in both a hybrid format, a completely online format, as well as in person. And because that's the world we live in, really.
It's definitely the world we're living in right now as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll sort of in order to sort of bring us back all together, I might ask you the question first, Michael. How do you think you'll know that the project has been successful?
One of the problems, I think, of service, providing a service need, it's not a project. A project is really quite easy. You say, we will do this over this time, this is how we'll do it, and we can measure off against that if it's a project. If it's a performance, for example, that's very easy. It's audience numbers, it's reach, it's qualitative comments back. I think that one of the things is that it's providing in the outset about what do people know at the start. So it's actually starting to interrogate the participants to interrogate themselves about what they don't know, then providing them with the tools to find that out for themselves. Because by the end of the time with us, we would like them to have agency. So they are no longer dependent on us, but that they can go out into the world. And so it's a tracking of skills and knowledge base. It's also about the achievements of those skills and knowledge base as they go and write a grant, get mentorship on the grant, whether they are successful or not, and if they're not successful, what kind of feedback they get. It's about whether they create writers groups for themselves. It's about how their pitches to publishers, journals go. It's about how they are feeling confident with themselves. It's about where they will set themselves up. It's also important across all our programs. And because going back to the point that writing is glacial over the course of years, is keeping that longitudinal kind of engagement with them, so that we can say that 2 years ago, this writer was part of the academy. They've now managed to get themselves a publishing deal, a show produced, a script on screen, and they are starting to find themselves. So it's...
Yeah. So I might invite everybody else back onto screen if you want to join Michael and myself now, and I'll ask you guys a similar question about how you think how you'll know your program has been successful. I'm going to ask Fraser.
I was going to say, I'm happy to jump in on that. But I guess there's a couple of really simple starting points for us. One of them will be just a greater understanding in across companies in the industry in New South Wales around who else is delivering youth arts programs in the sector, and a personal kind of connection between people running those programs. And I think if that happens, we'll immediately see an increase in collaborations and programs delivered.
Brilliant. I might go back through Camp Factory.
Thanks, Beck. I think there's a number of ways we can measure the outcomes of this project, so that some of them are quite standard ways in terms of participants and the number of participants we have in terms of the mentorees, also the audience numbers that we have at the public program events and the digital online events that we generate as part of this program. We're going to have an official series of feedback opportunities from participants, from the mentorees to create case studies of their story going through the project, to share, to reflect on and share sort of the outcomes of that. We'll have a process of feedback from our partners about what it meant for them to be participating in this and what sort of real life tangible outcomes it had for those institutional and non-institutional partners that we have. Because this is a 2-year project, this sort of feedback and measurement of our outcomes is going to be an ongoing process, because socially engaged arts practice has to be very adept at adapting. This program will also be like that, so we'll be constantly sort of reviewing it to see how we have to change and how the nuance of it has to shift. We're also going to undertake a board review of the project in terms of just operationally because we also hope that this project is contributing to the sector, but it's also contributing to the CAD factory understanding deeper who we are and what we're trying to achieve. So from a board level and a staff level, we'll be kind of reviewing what this project means to us. And then we have the resources that we're going to generate, so we can measure those in terms of the number of resources, very simple in terms of KPIs, but then also, as we're also at the same time undergoing a web page rebranding and redevelopment, and those resources will be housed on there. It'll be an opportunity for us to measure how they're engaged with. So I think there's a number of ways that we can just measure statistics and numbers. Some of those things often we don't measure in socially engaged practice in some ways, but also have more reflections and people talking about sort of impact for them personally and professionally.
Yeah, and I think just going back to what Michael was talking about, I think with longitudinal, I think it's also a factor in your work and probably with a range of you here. So Carl, same question. How do you know the program's going to be successful or is successful?
I guess there's a couple of things. So we're working with the Cultural Development Network and using their evaluations program called TARCSO, which is based on a theory of change model. And part of the program itself talks about program logic and theory of change as a way of understanding as individual practitioners how what you're doing is actually delivering on goals that you set. So we'll be using that for the program itself, but also establishing a network that connects all the various cohorts virtually, and every 12 months we're going to check in with the cohorts to see where they're at with their project. So in the delivery of the course, the people that come along hopefully come along with project ideas, which is kind of the intention. You don't necessarily have to have something completely solid, but something that you want to go and do. And we will make sure that in that period of time they develop a plan so that they can go ahead and do that. And then 12 months afterwards, we will check in with each of those people and say, hey, how did you go? And then I guess the other thing that's really important about the program, like I was saying before, is that it's about developing new networks and relationships between artists in certain areas. And so whether or not those relationships blossom into new projects, which is already starting to happen with our pilot group, and I suspect that will continue to happen. So seeing how people's relationships maintain and whether those networks strengthen over a longer period of time.
Brilliant, thank you, Carl. And Lena, moving to you, same question.
We also embed monitoring and evaluation into the way that we work, into all of our programs, and so we'll be doing that at every stage of this program. All the organisations who undertake the program will develop equity action plans, which are kind of overarching documents that actually have KPIs and kind of are connected to dates and budgets, so they'll be able to track how they go over 12 months. But we'll also be, like similar to dance makers and what Carl was saying, we'll also be checking in a year later with a self-reflection tool for organisations to do. After each training session, we send out surveys. After the mentor sessions, we send out surveys, but we also engage researchers to do more qualitative kind of, interviews and analysis. So we'll be producing a report at the end of the program that kind of collates all of this information and data, and hopefully gives us some reflections on how to strengthen the program, what went really well, what we could have done better, and also gives us a sense of whether we achieved what we set out to achieve.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And finally, Gabrielle.
So we'll use the same forces that will generate the Rights Animated project, and that's Greg's creativity and our partnerships, so our partnerships with Accessible Arts and Arts Law. Greg will create a survey in using his illustrative language to make it as accessible as possible to community of people with intellectual disability and literacy challenges. And that survey will be distributed to Accessible Arts, Arts Law, and throughout the supported studios across New South Wales. And we'll also be measuring simply how engaging people find the rights guide. So we'll be measuring how many people go online and engage with the digital material, because really that's what we're wanting. At the moment, we're finding, for instance, the artists weren't engaging with the easy read versions of policies and rights. So will it have more clicks now that it's an illustrated version?
Thank you all so much. And I think one of the things that just really strikes me about this group is how this group, I think, can also be a group that can have conversations together about your programs and how they're moving forward. Do any of you want to ask each other questions at the end of this? Oh, Lena.
When I was just listening to Gabrielle and CAD Factory, sorry, I've forgotten your name because you didn't put your name down there. But I was thinking, wow, we have to connect because your knowledge and expertise in this space would really be awesome for the work that we're about to start. And so we'd love to kind of connect with you. And yeah, all of the work was really exciting, and I'm sure we could make a lot of connections, but I could see really obvious connections with your organisations.
I thought the same thing when you were speaking. I'm surprised we haven't connected already.
I know. I'm like, that's crazy. I know. Well, now's the time. Thanks for bringing us together.
Yes,
Create.
I was bringing people together.
Organisational dating service.
Brilliant.
And I was actually thinking when Carl was speaking, in a way there's an affinity with what Studio A are doing with this project, because it's often legal rights documents and artists are seen as kind of two polarized worlds, whereas we're having an artist illustrate a legal rights document, and it's actually making it accessible not just to artists but even to the legal professionals that we're talking to. So I saw an affinity with how Dance Makers Collective operates in your project.
Yeah, I agree, and I think what's really great about all of the groups is that that there is so much artist leadership in that, and quite often, you know, that the translation of information is about it coming from someone else who thinks they know but doesn't have an art form practice or expertise, and being able to translate that from the point of view of an artist is so key. And obviously, DMC, we are all artists. Everybody who's employed by the organisation has an artistic practice, and being able to take that, you know, dry information from the perspective of someone who has a practice is really, I think, an important way of solving this problem, that we're not, you know, people just aren't getting the information because it doesn't make sense to them in their language.
That's right. Yeah.
And I would kind of think that with dancers, the practice of dance through generations and the passing of knowledge body to body is absolutely kind of intrinsic to the art form. And I think that we can learn a lot about that, especially when we're talking about writers who can occasionally get a little bit too much in their head, to actually then to be able to come out of their solitary world and into a world which is a passing of knowledge person to person. I think absolutely invaluable, especially when we're talking about when that knowledge is from senior artists. And I think that one of the things that we're all doing, I think it's really important, is about that sort of that valuing of the knowledge of the senior artist. And I think we, especially with writing, I mean, I see writing as a foundational art form, and its intersectionality with all of you is fundamental. So I'm looking forward to any collaborations, if and when they come.
I think there's a reciprocity too, Michael, between more experienced or, you know, older, more established artists and younger artists. And I was actually really interested in your project, Fraser, and I hadn't really reflected for a while about, like the lack of youth-based, youth-led kind of organisations. And I was thinking, as you were talking, are we approaching our training as well through that lens? And I don't know, like I haven't thought enough about it, but are we also making sure that the experiences of younger creatives, which are very different to different, you know, each generation has specificities, like are we kind of accommodating those? Are those voices part of the way that we're developing the training? So thank you as well, because it's important to keep that in our minds.
Yeah, thanks, Lena. I mean, all the pieces sound fascinating, to be honest, and really just keeping track of how everyone progresses and what comes out of it will be really valuable, I think, for us and for the network of kind of organisations that we're talking to.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and really wholeheartedly thank you for joining us all today. And just to, just to give some, put some humanity back into these grant applications. Oh, hello, child. Put some humanity back into these grant applications and their outcomes, and I think there's a real generosity across these programs as well, as the sort of artist first approach that a lot of you are taking. Yeah, so thanks so much. I'm going to share the screen again, just for those of us who'll be watching this after it goes online, to share the contact details of Kelly Dolly, who is the Senior Manager of Arts Funding and Development. If you do want to hear about the program as it comes up again early next year, do get in touch with Kelly. So thank you all for joining us today, and please do get in touch if you want to learn more about these programs and more about the Service Needs Strategic Fund. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.